post-traumatic stress disorder. I trained in Richmond, Virginia, where we had a flagship VA hospital for the nation. It was an incredibly nice hospital. And part of my training for psychiatry was at the VA. I was exposed to a lot of Vietnam vets who had PTSD. And PTSD was something that had not been recognized in psychiatry until around the time of the Vietnam War, when people were coming home with these like very confusing symptoms. When we look back, these symptoms had been present in humans for a long, long time, but it had gone under a lot of different names. And the diagnosis of PTSD has evolved since I trained, so over the last 20 years, to include things that are new to society in the recent 5 years, 10 years, that were not present 20 years ago. The most common definition of PTSD back when I trained revolved around defining what is a trauma. And a trauma was defined as an incident in which you were scared for the loss of your life or limb, or you were witnessing an event where you were scared for the loss of a loved one's life or limb. Now, this has been generalized to include the world that we live in today, where not only might we see things, but we can hear about things. Like a loved one that's gone through a very traumatic incident, just hearing about that can lead to PTSD symptoms. And the last piece of PTSD is when you're repeatedly exposed to things that are beyond the realm of what's normal. That is traumatic. The examples that are generally given is, let's say, a first responder who's responding to an accident and has to collect human remains. That can lead to PTSD. Or let's say a police officer who's on a sex trafficking detail and is getting lots and lots of information about sex trafficking, and that's got an impact on them. That can lead to PTSD. So it's been expanded to not just the classic loss of life or limb of yourself or a loved one, but some other situations where you might find that it's hard to listen or hear or watch or believe what's going on in the world. Now, the three main symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder remain the same. And the three symptoms are reliving symptoms, avoidance symptoms, and physical reactivity symptoms. Reliving symptoms are things like having intrusive memories of the event. If it was a car accident, if it was being mugged, images, thoughts from the event will just come into your head and it's hard to get rid of them. You can have flashbacks where you can literally see the event unfolding. You can have nightmares where you're literally dreaming up and playing out the scenario in your sleep. Avoidance symptoms are ways that we try to avoid anything that reminds us of the traumatic event. So someone who's had sexual abuse will find that if there's anything on TV or a movie that involves violence, sexual violence, they can't even watch that, right? Avoidance of anything that may be triggering to them, any thoughts or memories of that. We'll see that if there was a location where something happened, people will avoid that. But there's a whole host of avoidance responses that people have. And then the physical reactivity that people get will be going from 0 to 100 miles an hour in terms of their heart rate and adrenaline with anything that reminds them of the trauma. And sometimes people aren't even aware that they've been triggered, because it's an anniversary, or someone mentions going to a hospital and something had happened in the hospital for them. but this physical reactivity is incredibly common with post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, the challenge for treating post-traumatic stress disorder is that we don't have great medications that can help, but we can treat symptoms. PTSD can lead to depression, and antidepressants can be helpful. PTSD can have anxiety associated with it, and anxiety medications can be helpful. Sleep is a commonly disturbed thing with PTSD, and we have medicines that can help with sleep. So we're treating symptoms of the PTSD, not necessarily the PTSD itself at this point. There are some medicines that have been shown to help if they're given very soon after the trauma. So for instance, beta blockers given shortly after a traumatic event have been shown to help decrease the incidence of PTSD in people who are exposed to traumatic events. And psychotherapy is also very, very helpful for PTSD. And the sooner it gets started, the more effective it can be. There are also there's evidence that TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, even though it's not an approved indication for PTSD, there's indications that can be helpful as well. Meditation, mindfulness have also been shown to be effective for PTSD.